Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here. Talk about the latest animated Disney film, Wish. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So in many ways, I feel like the narrative that kind of Disney has just completely lost its magical touch is somewhat challenged by the fact that I think a lot of the so-called modern Disney films like Moana and Tangled and Zootopia are, in my opinion, actually quite good. But there has been some pretty significant misses in recent years. Movies like Strange World and Lightyear, where a lot of families sort of emphatically rejected those movies, both for the fact that they were just sort of uninspired, but also just for some kind of problematic, unwanted content elements that were infused into those stories. And it does feel like sort of the once invincible Disney Studios is leaking water. They are in desperate need for a hit to kind of restore some of its reputation. And Wish very much feels like a purposeful, some might even say a desperate attempt for Disney to do just that. It's kind of a throwback to more of its golden era of films. And I think this is a movie that I'm not sure will necessarily accomplish those lofty ambitions. This isn't, I don't think, a movie that's going to become a smash hit or destined to become a beloved classic, but it is, at least to me, kind of a testament that Disney still does know how to tell, kind of weave a compelling fairy tale story. I think in many ways, Wish is kind of a middle-of-the-road Disney story. It's definitely not bad. I think it's actually quite good. I enjoyed this movie. It just never elevates itself sort of into the stratosphere of some of the greater Disney films from the past. I think it's sort of, whereas a lot of those previous Disney movies were very groundbreaking when they came out, Wish feels a lot more like kind of uninspired, like a familiar retread of paths that we've wandered down many times before. Kind of instead of sort of telling like some of the original Disney stories, a tale as old as time, sort of classic storytellings. In a lot of ways, Wish feels like it's telling the story of Disney itself, filled with just a lot of Easter eggs and kind of self-referential nods to prior films. I do think these allusions are often fun. I know my kids enjoyed sort of picking out the different references from other movies that they knew, but in the same time, it does feel almost like a counterproductive, like a constant reminder of like previous greater films in the Disney canon. In hindsight, perhaps the most impressive part about some of those early Disney films is just how consistently the studio was able just to churn out like massive, infectious hit songs, whereas musically, Wish is somewhat more hit or miss. There are some good songs in this movie. Sort of its signature song, The Wish, is a banger. This is a powerful song. It's the song that's been featured in a lot of the trailers. There's also another song, Knowing What I Know Now, which goes surprisingly hard. Another sort of crowd-pleasing song in this film. But kind of beyond those two songs, the rest of the songs in this movie are unfortunately quite forgettable. Even like just driving home from the theater right after seeing it, I struggled to remember the melodies of any of those other songs. Chris Pine, he voices the villain in this movie. He's a great actor. He's a good voice actor. He's just not the world's greatest singer. He's not bad, but he just doesn't have the vocal, pipes to be able to really elevate some of the lackluster songs he's given. And really, outside of the two sort of successful songs that I do think are kind of worthy additions to Disney, most of the music of this is just entirely forgettable. Something that makes far more of an impression, however, is the visual aesthetics in this. This is a gorgeous movie. It does a lot of interesting things where it blends like kind of more modern 3D animation with like a retro kind of hand-drawn 2D aesthetic. And it's beautiful. And the beauty of that hand-drawn aesthetic did make me yearn for really a return to that kind of seemingly lost aesthetic style. As far as the characters, they're all fine. They're all enjoyable characters, although they don't really pop as much as maybe the visuals do. Asha, she's a fine kind of addition as the new sort of Disney heroine. She's likable, although she's really not given much personality beyond the fact of just sort of her bubbling internal goodness. And kind of similarly, Chris Pine as the villain, King Magnifico. He's amusing, he's fun, although for the most part very one-dimensional. But maybe the standout character, Valentino, sort of the talking donkey, as expected from some of the trailers. He does steal a lot of scenes. He is an effective sort of sidekick, effective comic relief, although perhaps maybe a little bit too underutilized. Kind of content-wise, Wish is relatively clean. It lacks some of the problematic, like the language or the sexual things that have derailed some other kind of recent animated films. At the same time, I do think there are maybe a few elements that Christian parents would at least want to be aware of. And one of those is kind of much like, the classics like Sleeping Beauty or Snow White. The villain in this, Chris Pine's character, is a magic user. He's a sorcerer that sort of dabbles into so-called kind of forbidden magic, where he talks about curses, and you see him like kind of churning and adding items into like a boiling cauldron, very much intentionally reflective of something like Snow White or Sleeping Beauty. And kind of like those films, his magical power is sort of visualized by these like glowing green kind of tendrils that go out. So there definitely is magic in this, although at least with like the witchcraft aspect, it is framed as being an evil. Personally, I've just never been troubled as a Christian by kind of magical elements in fairy tale stories, but I do know that there are other Christians that have very different opinions on that, so be aware of that. As far as violence, really not a whole lot going on here either. The wishes in this film are depicted as like tangible physical objects, and the destruction of those objects causes pain, although nothing fatal, to the wisher. Remember, one other thing is just, and this isn't necessarily violence, but just Chris Pine's villain, the evil king in this, can be quite menacing. It can be frightening, nothing over the top, but it might be too intense for maybe the younger viewers for this. Sexuality, there's really no sexuality here as well. There was a joke that I didn't fully catch that I think is probably harmless. It just sort of struck me a bit off, where sort of a male character seems sort of dejected when he is told that the Asha character won't turn 18 for a few months. And given the context like of the story, turning 18 is a significant milestone, so it probably is harmless. Just the way that that scene was delivered just struck me as a bit odd. And while no sort of sexual things, kind of sexuality is explicit for any of the characters, some of sort of Asha's main group of friends did seem somewhat ambiguous, both sort of their own sexuality and also sort of their relationship to each other. There's nothing overtly sort of stated through the film, or nothing that a kid would pick up or perceive, but just sort of given some of Disney's recent track record, there may be areas where as a parent you might read into a bit more going on. As far as themes, things going on the surface of this film, there's a couple of interesting things that I think will be of note for Christians. And one's this sort of our human origin story. The song I'm a Star in this film opens with the lyrics, "Have you ever wondered why you look up at the sky for answers?" And to expect a Disney fairy tale to provide like a biblical, theological answer to that question is obviously wishful thinking. And the film seems to instead provide a much more like naturalistic answer to that question, because a later line in that film says, "See, we're all just little nebulae in a nursery. From supernovas, now we've grown into our history. We're taking whys right out of mystery." And then ultimately the song kind of concludes, "We are our own origin story." And there is sort of an ambiguous kind of plot thing in the story where like the characters are stars. They have some synergy with sort of all of creation and with the stars, and this outside of that song becomes like a central important plot point later in the climax. And while it's never explicitly explored in the film itself, the obvious implications to that is sort of a natural origin of us, that we kind of came from the cosmos and we're all kind of made of the same matter, and we are sort of stars, and very rather than in any way kind of reflecting or pointing towards more of like creationism or like a divine creator. And overall, at least for me, I don't think it's anything necessarily that, hey, no, son, we aren't actually stars kind of conversation won't clear up with young viewers. Although I think some Christians, parents might want to use this movie as a conversation starter to talk about sort of this, where we came from and kind of God's creation. Maybe one other theme is just sort of the way that this film kind of recontextualizes the whole idea of wishing upon a star and what does that look like. Because despite being sort of a throwback to sort of that classic wishing star, the film's actual message about wishes has been updated, has been adapted from sort of, the familiar canon, where wish more suggests that life isn't about just sort of passively waiting for, wishes to be granted, but that it's very much about actively pursuing after those dreams and wishes. Because in the story, the characters all surrender their wishes to the king, kind of for safekeeping, because they fear that their wishes are going to be lost or they won't be fulfilled. And it's kind of depicted when they surrender these wishes as like an important part of their life force is being lost. That those wishes are an important part of them. And kind of throughout the story, throughout Asha's actions, ultimately the characters come to learn that, you know, it's not just about having those desires granted, but that life is really about sort of the experiences you have in pursuing after those. And of course, a lot of Christians may still find kind of even that updated messaging to be far too individualistic and self-focused, you know, to imply that life's just about pursuing after your own sort of dreams and ambitions. Although, to be fair, a lot of the dreams in this film are kind of for the collective good, for the common good of people. They aren't necessarily all just selfish reasons, but still, it still is a theme that Christians can kind of work through, kind of talk through with their kids. I think Disney has always sort of been idealistic with its messaging, kind of reflecting more pragmatic concerns just to inspire kids to dream big dreams. Well, this is very much in that mold. I do think that the kind of the updated approach is a more mature presentation from sort of that classic message. So in the end, I don't think Wish is a movie that's going to displace Frozen from sort of your child's, you know, go-to rotation of films, or a film that I think will kind of change the minds of parents who've become disillusioned with Disney and just sort of animated films in general. But at least to me, that doesn't mean that this is an unsuccessful film. I enjoyed it a lot. It does lack sort of the inventiveness of those early kind of the golden age of Disney movies. But I do think for what it is, this is a very charming and fun fairy tale story that I do think young viewers will enjoy. But hey, let me know what you think. Would love to hear if your kids enjoyed it, what you thought of it. If you noticed anything kind of going on thematically or content-wise that I missed, would love to have you share that in the comment section. And also, if you guys haven't done so, I encourage you, subscribe to our channel, become a Collider. I got a lot of movie reviews and podcasts and just other fun stuff. Would love to have you be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thanks for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.